Now, there are a lot of misconceptions about the MPC in regards to standalone and the MPC software. I think I want to clear some of that up today. Some of this stuff that I'm about to talk about might surprise you. You might not like everything I'm about to say, and you might hate some of the stuff I'm about to say also. But I'm definitely going to keep it real. Follow me. So I'm going to start out by saying just about every DAW that's currently on the market has different tier levels. Now, what do I mean by that? Almost every DAW that's available has different levels or different variants of that DAW that you can purchase. FL Studio, Cubase, Ableton, Pro Tools, and many others have different variants of the DAW that you can purchase. That being said, Akai and the MPC software is no different. As of right now, whether you believe it or not, Akai has 3 different versions of the MPC software. Also, one of the biggest misconceptions that a lot of people have is the MPC software that is built into the hardware units in standalone is not the highest version of the software. Hold on. Wait a minute. Before you start typing in the comments and going crazy, let me explain. In doing so, let's compare it to Ableton. Ableton has 4 different versions of Ableton, really 3, and then 1 with some extra stuff. But we're going to compare that to the MPC software. So the lowest version of Ableton that you can get currently is Ableton Live II. This version of Ableton is free. It's also very limited. In Ableton Live II, you only get 8 audio tracks and 8 MIDI tracks. That's it. In comparison with MPC Beats, which is the lowest grade version of the MPC software, you get 8 MIDI tracks and you only get 2 audio tracks. But MPC Beats is also free, just like Ableton Live Lite. Now, the next version up from Ableton Live Lite is Ableton Live Intro. And with Ableton Live Intro, you get 16 MIDI tracks and 16 audio tracks. With the MPC, the next version up from MPC Beats is actually the version of the MPC software that is built into the hardware units. So in actuality, the MPC hardware units contain the intro version of the MPC software. And I'm saying that due to the limitations of the MPC software in standalone. I've said it before in quite a few videos like this one and this one. The MPC in standalone only has 8 MIDI tracks and 8 audio tracks, which is a total of 16 tracks outside of workarounds. You can do workarounds to increase your track limit, but that's extra steps you have to take. Now, the next version of Ableton is Ableton Live Standard, which is the highest version outside of Ableton Live Suite, which basically just gives you all of the extra plugins and stuff. But Standard is basically the highest version of Ableton. The equivalent version of Ableton Live Standard in the MPC is the MPC Desktop 2.0 software. And I know that we're in 3.0 right now, and we don't have the 3.0 desktop software. Dear Kai, please bring us the desktop software. Make me happy. It will make a lot of other people happy as well. We are patiently waiting. But the desktop software is the highest version of the MPC software, contrary to popular belief. The desktop software, when it comes to the MPC, has 128 audio tracks and 128 MIDI tracks. That is a far cry from the 8 audio tracks and the 8 MIDI tracks that you are stuck with when you are in standalone. This also means that when you get outside of that 8-track limit, you do not have to do workarounds to try to get more tracks. You could just go to another track. Now, I definitely understand that some people say they like limitations because you have to be more creative to do things. But for me, I always wonder why limit myself when I don't have to. To explain that further, so let's say I'm building a beat and I have 8 MIDI tracks and I want to add another track. In order for me to add another track, I'm going to have to bounce that MIDI track to audio, then take that MIDI track and pull that audio into a drum program and then use that drum program to play that track, and then go back and delete that MIDI track and then create another empty track to add a new instrument or a new drum program or a new sound or whatever it is that I want to do. It's a bunch of extra steps. Whereas if I'm using the MPC in controller mode, I'll just add another track. Takes way less time. Way less time than having to be creative to come up with a workaround. Now, I've also gotten a lot of comments like these, which say that the MPC sounds better in standalone than the MPC software. And to address that quite simply, kinda. Let's talk about that a little bit more. So, when it comes to the MPC in standalone, the MPC is a hardware unit. The MPC as a hardware unit has an audio interface built into it. It has inputs built into it, it has outputs built into it, and it has converters built into it. Y'all remember the converter conversation that we just had. And no shade at Bolo the producer, but I saw a video where he said that people should learn how to use the MPC in standalone and maybe they wouldn't use controller mode. I kind of think that's false, but I think it's true at the same time. Kinda. I'm gonna go into some more detail. If you learn how to use the MPC in standalone, if you know how to use the MPC in standalone, in and out, contrary to a lot of popular belief, but you automatically know how to use the MPC software when in controller mode. Now, the MPC is currently 3.0 and the software is 2.15. Y'all heard my prayer. Outside of that, it is the same. So anything that you can do in standalone, it works 100% the same in controller mode with some caveats. Now, as I said before, the MPC has a hardware unit, inputs and outputs and converters and all of that stuff built into the MPC. So it has a certain sound output. The unit has a certain sound, it just does. Now, when it comes to the MPC software, if you don't have an MPC hardware unit and you're just using a keyboard controller, maybe you have an MPK Mini, I don't know, maybe you have any other kind of MIDI controller, it doesn't even matter, and you're using random audio interfaces with that MIDI controller, yes, the sound could be different than the sound of the MPC hardware units because there are a vast amount of audio interfaces out there and your sound is 90% connected to the quality of your audio interface. Wait a minute, hold up. Y'all keep coming back and watching all my videos. It says that 88% of y'all ain't subscribed. Come on, man, do me a solid. You like my videos? What you waiting on? Go ahead and hit that button. All right. That's all I gotta say. Back to the video. As you know, audio interfaces range from a multitude of things. There are $100 audio interfaces and there are $4,000 audio interfaces or more. So your sound can vary a lot between the type of interface that you have. In that case, the sound could be worse than the MPC in standalone, or it could be much, much better than the sound of the MPC in standalone. But that's not even what I want to discuss right now. That's a whole different caveat right there. Now, if you are using a hardware MPC with the MPC software in controller mode, and you select the MPC as its own audio interface. So if you go into the MPC software and you go to the audio tab, and instead of selecting the audio interface, you select the MPC as your audio interface, the MPC software will then use the same inputs, outputs, and converters as the hardware unit. And therefore, the sound is the same. It is the same. You're still hitting the same MPC pads. You're still using the same MPC key groups. You're using the same MPC inputs, outputs, and converters for that sound. It's the same. The difference is when you are using the MPC in controller mode, instead of being limited to 8 audio tracks and 8 MIDI tracks, you now have 128 audio tracks and 128 MIDI tracks. You basically open up the floodgates. Now, this is dependent on how good your computer is also. If you have a cheap, basic computer that you got off a Walmart shelf, it's not going to be able to handle the same capacity as a high quality gaming computer or something like that. Some of the things that you have to keep in mind. But as far as the MPC sounding different in standalone and controller mode, very subjective. Especially if you're using the MPC as its own audio interface. In my opinion, if you're doing that, it is the same. However, if you're using the MPC software with an RME audio interface, a Universal Audio Apollo interface, or any of the top of the line interfaces on the market, it's going to sound it's going to blow the MPC out of the water of how the MPC sounds in standalone. However, if you're using a cheap audio interface, something that you just found on the shelf for $100 or something, it's not going to sound nowhere near as good as the MPC. It's just not. It's not going to have, the converters aren't going to be as good, the inputs aren't going to be as good, and the outputs aren't going to be as good. So there lies some of the differences in the way that the MPC sound. We are also having the conversation about 3.0 being more and more like a DAW and less like an MPC. And when it comes to that, I definitely feel that, and I think that that's true. It is becoming more and more like a DAW. At the same time, I feel like that's something that a lot of people want. I'm seeing a lot of people pushing to be able to produce and track out full songs in the MPC in standalone. In order for that to happen, it's going to have to become more and more like a DAW. Now, that being said, do I want to lose the core workflow of the MPC? Absolutely not. Now, if it's augmented and added on, I'm all for it. And I think everybody should be all for it. Here's the thing, in my opinion, this is my opinion, but just because the MPC has a lot of features in it, you don't have to use the stuff that you don't like. There are features in the MPC right now that I only touched once or twice. It wasn't for me. It's just not something I'm going to use, but I'm happy it's there because at some point it might be something I need just in case. But as a go-to, it's just not something I'm going to use. So even if the MPC does get all kinds of DAW features, like we get a real arranger with a real audio editor, and we can do complex fades, cross fades, we can do complex mixes in a real mixer and a real linear timeline on the MPC, I'm all for it. Now, if that's not something I want, I don't have to use it. I can still go back to using my regular DAWs. And I believe that most people use some sort of DAW in conjunction with their MPC. Like me, I can make beats on a DAW. I can make beats on anything. But I prefer to use the MPC to make all of my beats. And then I put it in the DAW to record, track out songs, and everything from there. Now, another question that I've gotten a lot is, why would you buy an expensive MPC just to use it as a controller? As if using it as a controller is a bad thing. I don't feel that way. I feel like using it as a controller gives me the best of what I can do, because I can do so much more with it using it as a controller than using it in standalone. And to be honest, this is just me. Just me. A lot of other people think differently, and that's fine. But when I bought an MPC initially, talking about these new generation of MPCs, I did not buy it with the thought of using it in standalone at all. When I went to look for a newer model or a new generation of MPC, at the time, I wanted a great controller. I had a basic MIDI controller, didn't have any knobs on it, it didn't have any pads on it. All I can do was play basically MIDI notes, and that was it. Bare bones basic. So at the time, I was looking for a MIDI controller with pads on it, a MIDI controller with knobs on it, and something that I can use to get my hands off of the mouse. I wanted something I could be more tactile with when I'm making beats, so I could be more hands-on with the productions. I was looking at MIDI keyboards and things like that, and at the time the MPC Touch was out, and I thought that might be a good way to go, and I can use that to kind of control everything in the DAW that I was using to make beats with. When I went to purchase the MPC Touch, the MPC Live came out that day. So I bought the MPC Live instead to use that as my main controller for my setup. Had no intentions of standalone. Standalone was like a bonus. I can use it, make beats on it, and do whatever I needed. And then if I had to go somewhere, if I needed to travel, I can unplug it and take it with me, which would be the only time that I was using it in standalone. That being said, so even as I use the MPC X, 90% of the time it is in controller mode. Even to this day, when I'm working on actual projects or things that I really need to be solid, I'm using 2.15 in controller mode. When I'm just playing around and testing things to see how things work and stuff like that, then I'll switch to standalone and use 3.0. But I am not primarily going to be in 3.0 until, please Akai, I know you're listening, we need that desktop software. Until we get that desktop software. Once we get that desktop software, then I'll be using the MPC in controller mode with the desktop software probably 100% of the time. Unless I'm on the go somewhere and I'll take the Live II or something with me, and then I'll be using standalone until I get back. Now, I know I said a lot in this video. How many of y'all got mad at it? For what? Why? There's no point. Just learn something. Listen, soak it in. If it's not something you want to do, guess what? You don't have to do any of it. I just want you to open your eyes a little bit to see what's really out there. I'm definitely one of the people that's hoping for an MPC 3 desktop version, but until then, we got what we got, and I gotta work with it. Let me know how you feel about what I said in the comments, and as always, I'll see y'all in the next video. I'm out.